They called it the marriage of the century, but no one knew the Duke had chosen his bride for one reason only. She was desperate enough to accept a loveless contract. What London society didn't whisper about was far worse. The first Duchess had died, screaming another man's name. The child's true father was living in the shadows plotting revenge, and the new bride had signed the contract under a false identity that could destroy them all. Before this night ended, one woman would lie dead, one man would confess to murder, and Elizabeth would discover that her threadbare gown held a secret even she didn't know, a secret that would either save her life or end it. Elizabeth couldn't breathe. 300 pairs of eyes fixed on her worn silk gown, the same dress her mother had worn 20 years ago. The fabric, once midnight blue, had faded to a ghostly gray. Whispers rippled through the ballroom like wildfire. Is that lace from the last century? Poor thing. The Ashford family truly has fallen. She thought, I have 48 hours before the creditors seize our townhouse. 48 hours to find a wealthy husband willing to overlook my threadbare dress and empty pockets. What were the odds? About the same as finding a unicorn in Hyde Park. Her hands trembled. The ballroom of Blackwood Manor stretched before her, all glittering chandeliers and silk-clad debutantes who probably spent more on their gloves than Elizabeth's family had for food this month. Lady Victoria Pemberton glided past in emerald green, dripping with jewels. She didn't even glance at Elizabeth, just lifted her fan to hide a cruel smile. She actually came, Victoria whispered to her companion, loud enough for Elizabeth to hear. In that ancient rag. Heat flooded Elizabeth's cheeks. Every instinct screamed run. She thought, this was a mistake. I should leave before I'm humiliated further, but where would I go? Back to watching Mother die because I couldn't swallow my pride for one night? You are late. The voice cut through the mockery like a blade, deep, cold, absolute. The entire ballroom fell silent. Duke Alexander Blackwood stood 3 feet away, 34 years old, devastatingly handsome and famous for two things, his immense wealth and his frozen heart. Since his wife's death in childbirth 5 years ago, he hadn't danced with a single woman. His gray eyes swept over Elizabeth's dress. The scent of sandalwood and leather drifted from him. Expensive, masculine, intoxicating. She wanted to disappear into the marble floor. Your Grace, she began. That gown. His voice carried across the silent hall like a pronouncement from God. It belonged to your mother, didn't it? Elizabeth's throat tightened. How did he know? Yes. The Duke stepped closer. 1 step, 2. Close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His jaw was carved from stone, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke words that would change her life forever. You have eclipsed every beauty in London tonight. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Lady Victoria's fan clattered to the floor. Elizabeth stared at him, certain she'd misheard. She thought, did the cold Duke just compliment my ancient dress? Am I hallucinating from hunger? That's possible. I haven't eaten properly in 3 days. What? She said aloud. Your mother was known for her grace, the Duke continued, his tone formal, but his eyes, something flickered there, something almost vulnerable. I remember seeing her wear that dress at the Queen's ball. She was the most elegant woman in the room, just as you are now. He extended his gloved hand. The leather was butter soft, clearly custom made. Dance with me, Lady Elizabeth. In that moment, 3 thoughts crashed through Elizabeth's mind simultaneously. First, this can't be happening. Second, the Duke who never dances just asked me to dance. Third, I'm about to faint from shock, and that would be spectacularly embarrassing. I don't understand, she whispered. Neither do I, he said quietly. For a brief second, she saw pain flash across his face, raw and terrible, like looking into an open wound. Then, it vanished behind his mask of ice. Will you accept? She placed her trembling hand in his. His palm was warm through both their gloves, solid, real, grounding her in this impossible moment. The orchestra struck up a waltz. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. His hand settled on her waist, warm even through her gloves, corset, and the thin silk. Elizabeth's heart hammered so violently she was certain the entire ballroom could hear it. Every eye tracked their movement as they began to turn. The marble floor was slippery beneath her worn dancing slippers. She thought, "Don't trip. For the love of God, don't trip and fall in front of 300 people while dancing with a duke." "You're shaking," the duke observed. His voice held no warmth but no cruelty either, just emptiness like a beautiful house with no one home. "I'm terrified," she admitted before she could stop herself. "Of me? Of this? Of them?" She glanced at the sea of faces surrounding them, some shocked, some scandalized, some gleaming with malicious glee at this new gossip. "Of everything, frankly. It's been that kind of week." Something shifted in his expression, almost like approval. "Good. Fear means you're honest. I've had enough of lies to last 3 lifetimes." They swept past Lady Victoria, whose face had turned the color of old parchment, past the Countess of Harrington, whose jaw hung open like a broken drawer, past Elizabeth's own cousin, who looked like she'd witnessed a ghost proposing marriage to a hedgehog. The absurdity of it all hit Elizabeth suddenly. She thought, "A week ago I was selling Mother's jewelry to buy bread. Now I'm waltzing with the richest duke in England while wearing a dress older than most of his servants. Life is strange." "Why did you do this?" Elizabeth dared to ask. The duke's grip on her waist tightened slightly. "Do what?" "Choose me. Defend me. I'm nobody. My family has nothing except debts and a dying mother and a brother who can't stop gambling. I'm the worst investment you could possibly make." "Precisely." His gray eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch, a recognition, as if he saw straight through her pretenses to the desperate, frightened girl beneath. "Everyone else here wants something from me. Title, wealth, power, social advancement. You simply wanted to survive the night without complete humiliation." The words were blunt. True, unbearably so. She thought, is honesty really this painful? Or am I just not used to it? "I did come here hunting for a wealthy husband," she said aloud, surprising herself with her candor. "My mother is dying. My brother accumulated gambling debts we can't pay. The creditors are coming. I thought if I could just catch someone, anyone, with enough money to—" Her voice caught, "But I see now how foolish that was. Not foolish, brave." The music swelled. They turned beneath the chandelier, and its light caught the silver threads in her old gown, making them shimmer like starlight. For one moment, Elizabeth didn't feel poor. She felt almost beautiful. "There's a difference between cunning manipulation and honest desperation," the Duke continued. His voice dropped lower, intimate despite the crowd. "I learned to recognize it the hard way. My late wife taught me that lesson in blood." Elizabeth's chest tightened. Everyone knew the official story, the beautiful Duchess who died bringing his son into the world. But something in his tone suggested depths of pain no one had guessed. Before she could respond, the waltz ended. The Duke stepped back, releasing her. The coldness returned to his face like a door slamming shut. The warmth she'd glimpsed vanished so completely she wondered if she'd imagined it. "Come to my study in 10 minutes, he said. "I have a proposition for you." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the center of the ballroom as whispers exploded around her like fireworks. She thought, what have I just agreed to? And why does the word proposition sound both terrifying and oddly hopeful? Elizabeth found the Duke's study on the 2nd floor, guided by a stone-faced butler who said nothing. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. What could he possibly want? The door opened before she could knock. "Enter! Close the door!" The study smelled of leather, tobacco, and old books, a masculine sanctuary untouched by feminine softness. Heavy curtains blocked most of the moonlight. A single lamp burned on the massive oak desk where the Duke stood, his back to her. "Your Grace, how much does your family owe?" He didn't turn around. The bluntness stole her breath. That's not 20,000 pounds, 30. He finally faced her. In the dim light, his features looked carved from granite. "The creditors will seize your property within days. Your mother needs medicine you cannot afford. Your brother is being hunted by men who break legs for sport." Tears burned her eyes. "How do you know all this?" "I make it my business to know." He moved closer, each step deliberate. You came here tonight with a plan. Catch a wealthy fool, trade your beauty for his fortune. Am I wrong? Shame flooded her cheeks with heat. No, you're not wrong. At least you're honest. Something almost like approval flickered across his face. Most women in your position would lie, play the innocent victim. You don't. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the gray threading through his dark hair at the temples. I need a wife, he said flatly. Elizabeth's world tilted. I don't understand. My son is 5 years old. He needs a mother. My title requires an heir and a spare. I have only one child. Society demands I remarry. I've avoided it for 5 years, but my grandmother has made it clear. Find a bride by Christmas, or she'll choose one for me. His jaw tightened. I will not love you, Lady Elizabeth. I cannot. That part of me died with Catherine. The name hung in the air like a ghost. Then why me? She whispered. Because you need money more than you need love. He moved to his desk, pulled out a contract. 1 year of marriage. You will act as mother to my son, hostess for my estate, and companion in public. In exchange, I will pay all your family's debts immediately. Your mother will receive the best medical care London can provide. Your brother will be sent to America with enough funds to start fresh, far from his gambling associates. Elizabeth's mind reeled. It was too much, too fast. And after 1 year? We reassess. If you wish to leave, I'll provide you with a generous settlement, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. If you choose to stay, his voice dropped. We continue the arrangement. Without love, she said quietly. Without the lie of love. He held out the contract. I've had enough of women who claim to love me for myself. Catherine loved my title and my fortune. She died bringing my son into this world while calling for her lover's name. The bitterness in his voice was so sharp it could draw blood. Elizabeth stared at the papers in his hand. Every practical bone in her body screamed yes. Her mother could live. Her brother would be safe. She could eat something other than stale bread. But to marry without love, to spend a year, possibly more, with a man whose heart was permanently frozen. I need time to think, she managed. You have until noon tomorrow. The Duke's expression returned to ice. After that, the offer expires. I'll find another practical bride. She thought. Another woman desperate enough to accept a loveless prison. But was it really a prison if it saved everyone she loved? I'll give you my answer tomorrow, she said. He nodded curtly. Good night, Lady Elizabeth. She turned to leave. Her hand was on the doorknob when his voice stopped her. That dress your mother wore. His tone had changed, softer, almost vulnerable. I saw her wear it the night my own mother died. She was kind to a grieving boy everyone else ignored. I never forgot. Elizabeth looked back. The Duke stood in shadow, but she could have sworn she saw moisture in his gray eyes. Then he turned away, and the moment shattered. She fled the study, her mind a hurricane of thoughts. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the cold wall and tried to catch her breath. Marriage to the Duke meant survival. But at what cost? Her mother's weak voice echoed in memory. Never marry without love, my darling. Even poverty is better than a loveless cage. But her mother had never watched creditors rip furniture from the walls, had never seen her brother beaten bloody over gambling debts, had never felt true, desperate hunger. Elizabeth walked through the ballroom in a daze. The ball continued without her, dancers whirling, champagne flowing, laughter ringing false and hollow. Lady Victoria materialized from the crowd, her emerald gown shimmering. Enjoy your little chat with His Grace? Her smile was venomous. Don't get your hopes up. He'll never marry someone like you. He needs a woman of true breeding. Elizabeth said nothing. She simply walked past, head high, even as her world crumbled around her. Outside, the night air bit through her thin shawl. Her carriage, if one could call the rickety hired hack a carriage, waited at the end of the long drive, far from the elegant vehicles of true nobility. The coachman helped her inside. As they rattled away from Blackwood Manor, Elizabeth stared at the glittering windows. Somewhere in that mansion, a cold duke sat alone. Somewhere in London, her dying mother waited. Somewhere between those 2 points lay her decision. She had until noon tomorrow, 12 hours to choose between love and survival. Elizabeth didn't sleep. She sat by her mother's bedside in their cramped townhouse, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Each breath rattled like dry leaves. The physician had said 3 months, maybe 4. Without proper medicine, perhaps 3 weeks. The lamp cast dancing shadows across the peeling wallpaper. She thought, "What would you tell me to do, Mother? Choose love or choose life?" But she knew. Her mother had always chosen love, married a charming but financially reckless man, defended him even as he gambled away their fortune, forgave him until his dying breath. And where had love left her? Dying in a house that would be seized by creditors within 48 hours. "Elizabeth." Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, Mama." She took the fragile hand in hers. The skin felt like tissue paper, the bones bird-delicate beneath. "You came back early. The ball was eventful." Elizabeth forced a smile. "The Duke of Blackwood asked me to dance." Her mother's eyes widened, still that flash of the beauty she'd once been. "Alexander Blackwood? I remember him as a boy. Such sadness in his eyes even then." She coughed, her whole body shaking. "Did he? Is he still handsome?" "Devastatingly so," Elizabeth admitted, "and still sad. Be careful with sad men, darling. They either make you their salvation or their destruction." The words hung heavy. Elizabeth wanted to tell her about the proposal, the contract, the impossible choice. But her mother's breathing had turned labored again. She needed rest, not worry. "Sleep, Mama. I'll be here." She watched until her mother's breathing evened out, then stood and walked to the window. London stretched before her, a city of haves and have-nots, and she belonged firmly to the latter. Across the street, a wealthy merchant's daughter climbed into a gleaming carriage, wrapped in furs. Elizabeth wore the same chemise she'd worn for 3 days because they'd sold most of her wardrobe to buy medicine. The anger came sudden and hot. Why should I feel guilty for accepting the Duke's offer? Why should I romanticize poverty while my mother dies and my brother gets beaten? "Love doesn't pay for medicine," she whispered to her reflection. "Love doesn't feed empty stomachs." At dawn, her brother stumbled through the door. James was 23 but looked 40, face bruised, lips split, eyes hollow. He reeked of cheap gin and expensive perfume. "Did you catch one?" he asked without preamble. "A rich husband?" Elizabeth's hands clenched. "The Duke of Blackwood proposed." James's eyes lit up with grotesque hope. "Blackwood? Elizabeth, that's... his fortune could pay your debts?" Her voice was acid. "Could save you from the thugs who did that to your face? Could give mother medicine?" "Yes." He grabbed her shoulders. "Sister, this is our salvation. You have to accept." She shoved him away. "Get out. You smell like a brothel." "Elizabeth, I said get out." The shout tore from her throat. "Well, I'm deciding whether to sell myself in a loveless marriage. You're spending money we don't have on whores and cards." His face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like the boy he'd been before their father died, before grief and guilt drove him to gambling. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I can't stop. I've tried. The Duke is sending you to America if I accept," she said coldly. "Far from your gambling friends, far from me." Something flickered in his eyes, relief, shame, both. "Maybe that's for the best," he said quietly. Then he turned and left. Elizabeth stood alone in the shabby parlor. The clock on the mantel showed 11:15. 45 minutes until noon. She thought about the Duke's gray eyes, the way he'd looked at her in that study, not with lust or romance, but with something worse, understanding. He saw her for exactly what she was, desperate and honest about it. There was a strange comfort in that. At 11:55, Elizabeth arrived at Blackwood Manor. The butler, who'd been silent last night, actually spoke. "His Grace is expecting you in the study." The Duke stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn when she entered. "Well?" His voice held no emotion. "Your answer?" Elizabeth took a breath, thought of her mother's rattling breaths, her brother's broken face, the old dress that had once been beautiful. "I accept." Now he turned. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Was it relief? Resignation? Very well. He moved to his desk, dipped a quill in ink. "Sign here." Her hand trembled as she took the pen. The contract's words blurred. Marriage of convenience, Duration of 1 year, no expectation of romantic attachment, she signed. Elizabeth Margaret Ashford, soon to be Elizabeth Blackwood. We'll marry in 3 days, the Duke said. My solicitors will handle your family's debts today. Your mother will be moved to a private hospital tonight. Your brother sails for New York on Friday. It was done. Final. Irrevocable. Thank you, Your Grace, she managed. Alexander. His voice softened fractionally. You may call me Alexander when we're alone. In public, I'll be my lord. Or Your Grace. He paused. I'll arrange for a dressmaker. You'll need an appropriate wardrobe. The practicality of it struck her. She was now a transaction, a role to be filled, Duchess-shaped. One more thing, Alexander said. He pulled a small box from his desk drawer. Inside lay a ring, not a delicate lady's bauble, but a heavy signet ring with the Blackwood crest. This was my grandmother's. She wore it every day of her 60-year marriage. He slipped it onto Elizabeth's finger. Too large, it hung loose. We'll have it sized, he said. Everything will be proper. Their eyes met. For just a second, she saw the man beneath the ice, lonely, wounded, terrified of being hurt again. Then, his mask returned. Welcome to the family, Elizabeth. She was going to be a duchess. She was going to save everyone she loved. So why did she feel like she'd just signed away her soul? The wedding took 17 minutes. Elizabeth counted. 17 minutes to sign away her entire life. No flowers, no guests beyond the required witnesses. Alexander spoke his vows in a monotone that could have been reciting a grocery list. Eggs, milk, wife, bread. When the vicar said, "You may kiss the bride," Alexander pressed his lips to Elizabeth's forehead, cold, brief, brotherly. The kind of kiss you'd give an elderly aunt with questionable hygiene. She thought, well, that was romantic. Next, he'll probably shake my hand and discuss the weather. She was a duchess now. It felt like wearing someone else's skin, someone taller, more confident, less likely to trip over her own feet in terror. The carriage ride to Blackwood Manor stretched in silence. Alexander stared out the window, jaw tight. Elizabeth watched the countryside roll past, manicured estates giving way to wild forests, then finally the looming silhouette of her new home. She thought, this is it. My new life. In a house that looks like it eats small children for breakfast. Blackwood Manor crouched against the gray sky like a sleeping beast. All dark stone and narrow windows. Ivy crawled up the walls like grasping fingers. Beautiful, yes, but cold. So terribly bone-deep cold. Welcome home, Your Grace, the butler, Harrison, said as they entered. His face remained carefully blank, but Elizabeth could have sworn she saw pity in his eyes. Home. The word felt wrong in her mouth, foreign, like trying to speak French after one lesson. Alexander disappeared immediately. I have business in London, he said without looking at her. Harrison will show you to your rooms. Rooms, plural, of course. Separate bedchambers for a marriage built on paper and desperation. She thought. What did you expect? Romance? Passion? He told you exactly what this would be. A transaction. You're basically very expensive furniture now. Harrison led her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Portraits of stern-faced Blackwoods glared down at her with expressions that clearly said, you don't belong here. The air smelled of beeswax, old money, and something else. Sadness, regret, the accumulated disappointments of centuries. Your chambers, Your Grace. Harrison opened double doors to reveal a suite that took her breath away. Silk wallpaper in dove gray, a 4-poster bed draped in velvet that looked softer than clouds, a sitting room with French windows overlooking gardens that had clearly once been magnificent, but now grew wild, Persian rugs, crystal lamps, furniture that cost more than her family's entire townhouse. Elizabeth stood frozen. She thought, this bedroom is larger than our entire house. I could fit my old bedroom in the wardrobe, with room left over for neighbors. The late Duchess's rooms are across the hall, Harrison said carefully. His Grace thought you might prefer different accommodations. The late Duchess, Catherine, the woman whose name made Alexander's voice turn to ice and his eyes go dead. These are lovely, Elizabeth managed. Thank you, Harrison. The butler bowed, a precise, formal gesture. and left. Elizabeth stood alone in her gilded cage. She walked to the window. Below, a small boy, 5 years old, dark hair like his father, played with a wooden sword in the overgrown garden. A governess sat nearby, reading and occasionally glancing up to ensure he didn't brain himself. Her stepson, Thomas. She'd met him briefly after the ceremony, a solemn child who'd shaken her hand formally and said, "How do you do?" in a voice far too old for his years, like a tiny butler practicing for adulthood. Elizabeth thought, "He's 5 and already more polite than most adults I know. Poor child, growing up in this mausoleum." A knock interrupted her thoughts. A maid entered, young, nervous, with a cap slightly askew. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, I'm Annie. I'm to be your lady's maid." The title, Your Grace, still sounded ridiculous, like calling a cat Admiral. "Annie," Elizabeth tried to smile. "It's nice to meet you. I'm Elizabeth. Or, I was. I'm still getting used to being a Grace." The girl's eyes widened, clearly surprised by kindness from nobility. "Dinner is at 7, ma'am. His Grace's grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, will be joining you." After Annie left, Elizabeth explored her new prison. The wardrobe held gowns in every color. Alexander's dressmaker had worked miracles in 3 days. She ran her fingers over silk and satin, feeling like an imposter playing dress-up in her better's clothing. In the back of the wardrobe, she found something that didn't belong, a small portrait, face down. She almost left it, but curiosity, that old, terrible friend, made her pick it up. A woman stared back, breathtakingly beautiful, dark-haired, dark-eyed, wearing a crimson gown that hugged every curve like a lover's hands. Written on the back in feminine script, "Catherine Blackwood, Duchess. The day I captured Alexander's heart." Elizabeth's stomach twisted. This was her predecessor. The woman who'd owned Alexander's love, and apparently his heart, the mother of his child, the ghost she could never compete with, because the dead are always perfect in memory. She thought, "Wonderful. I'm married to a man in love with a corpse. This will end well." At 7 precisely, Elizabeth descended to dinner. The dining room could have seated 50. Tonight, only 3 places were set at one end of the impossibly long table. She thought, they could hold a foot race from one end to the other. Winner gets the salt. Alexander sat at the head, changed into evening clothes that probably cost more than a horse. He stood when she entered. At least he had manners. But his eyes remained distant, like he was looking through her rather than at her. "Elizabeth, this is my grandmother, Dowager Duchess Margaret Blackwood." An elderly woman with steel-gray hair and sharper eyes occupied the seat to Alexander's right. She looked Elizabeth up and down with the precision of a jeweler appraising a questionable gem and finding it wanting. The scent of roasted pheasant and some kind of sauce filled the air. Elizabeth's stomach growled. She hoped no one heard. She thought, "Please don't let me embarrass myself by drooling over the food. I'm a duchess now. Duchesses don't drool." "So you're the girl in the old dress," Margaret said. Her voice could cut glass. "The one who needed rescuing." Heat flooded Elizabeth's cheeks. Don't be coy, child. Alexander told me everything. You needed money. He needed a wife. A transaction." Margaret sipped her wine with the air of someone tasting vinegar. "At least you're honest about it. Better than that scheming Catherine." "Grandmother," Alexander's voice held warning. "Oh, don't grandmother me. The girl should know what she stepped into." Margaret turned back to Elizabeth. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind, like a surgeon deciding where to cut. "The first Duchess was beautiful, I'll grant her that. But beauty is just pretty poison wrapped in silk. She broke my grandson's heart, spent his money like water, and died in the bed of—" "Enough!" Alexander's fist hit the table. Crystal glasses trembled. A servant dropped a spoon. Silence crashed down like a guillotine blade. Elizabeth's heart hammered. She thought, died in whose bed? The official story said, childbirth. But Margaret's words suggest something far darker. "Also, can we please finish this sentence? The suspense is killing me." "You're right," Margaret said quietly, surprising them both. "The past is past. Let's speak of the future." "Elizabeth, can you run a household this size?" Elizabeth looked at the enormous dining room. "I'll learn. I'm a quick study. I once managed our entire house with one maid and a cook who drank gin for breakfast." Margaret's eyebrows rose. Did the cook at least cook well while drunk? Only on Tuesdays. A sound came from Alexander's direction, almost like a strangled laugh. Elizabeth glanced at him. His expression hadn't changed, but his eyes held the faintest glimmer of amusement. Progress. Can you handle London society? Margaret continued. They'll crucify you for marrying above your station. The gossip will be vicious. Let them try. Elizabeth lifted her chin. She thought, I survived poverty, a dying mother, and a gambling addict brother. I can survive some wealthy people being catty over tea. Something like approval flickered in Margaret's eyes. Good. You've got spine. You'll need it. She glanced at Alexander. And what about the boy? Thomas needs a mother, not another ghost wandering these halls. I intend to be a proper mother to him, Elizabeth said firmly. See that you do. Margaret stood, leaning on her cane. The sound of it tapping marble echoed like a judge's gavel. I'm old and I'm blunt, girl. This family has seen enough tragedy. Don't add to it by being weak or foolish. She left, her cane tapping a rhythm that said, I'm watching you. Elizabeth was alone with her cold husband. The servants cleared the barely touched plates. She'd been too nervous to eat more than 3 bites. The pheasant had been delicious. She thought, great. I'm going to starve to death in a house full of food because I'm too anxious to swallow. Alexander still hadn't spoken. The silence pressed down like a physical weight, thick, suffocating, full of unsaid things. Your grandmother mentioned Catherine died in someone's bed, Elizabeth said quietly. Might as well rip off the bandage. That's not the story society tells. His knuckles went white around the wine glass. For a moment, she thought it might shatter. The story society tells is the one I paid £50,000 to maintain. The admission hung between them, heavy, dangerous, bleeding truth. What really happened? She pressed. Alexander's eyes met hers, and for the first time since their wedding, she saw real emotion, raw, bleeding hurt that made her chest ache. She died giving birth to Thomas. That part is true, but she wasn't in our bed. She was in the gamekeeper's cottage where she'd been meeting her lover for months. Elizabeth's breath caught. The wine she'd just sipped turned bitter in her mouth. Oh, Alexander! I found them. His voice was hollow, scraped raw. Went looking for her when her labor started early. The midwife said she kept calling for John as she bled out. Not me, not her husband, never me. He drained his wine in one swallow. I gave her everything, title, wealth, devotion, a love so complete it nearly destroyed me. She gave me a son whose parentage I'll never be certain of, and a reputation I had to pay half my fortune to protect. The pain in his words made Elizabeth's chest physically hurt. Without thinking, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. He flinched like she'd burned him, but didn't pull away. His hand was warm beneath hers. She could feel his pulse, rapid, unsteady. Thomas is your son, she said firmly. Any fool can see it. He has your eyes, your bearing, even that little furrow between his brows when he's thinking. DNA doesn't erase doubt, but something in his expression softened fractionally. I love him. God help me. Even if he weren't mine by blood, I'd love him. But every time I look at him, I see her betrayal, her lies, the way she smiled at me while planning to meet her lover. Then stop looking at the past, Elizabeth said gently. Look at the boy who needs his father now, in this moment, not 5 years ago. Elizabeth woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. She was still in the chair beside Thomas's bed, her neck stiff, her gown wrinkled beyond salvation. The boy was already awake, staring at her with enormous gray eyes, his father's eyes, unmistakably. She thought, I look like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards, twice. This is not how duchesses are supposed to appear. Also, my neck may never work again. You stayed, Thomas said. It wasn't a question, more like wonder, as if she'd performed magic. I promised I would. Elizabeth stretched, wincing. Every vertebra in her spine cracked like gunshots. Good morning, Thomas. No one stays. His voice was matter-of-fact, heartbreaking in its resignation, like a 5-year-old who'd already learned the world's cruelest lesson. The governesses leave, the maids leave, Mama left. The casual cruelty of childhood truth. Elizabeth's heart cracked. She thought, This child speaks of abandonment the way other children speak of weather. She knelt beside his bed so they were eye level. The carpet was soft beneath her knees, Persian, probably worth more than her family's annual income. I'm not leaving. I'm your stepmother now. That means I stay. Stepmother. He tested the word like it might bite him. Like in the fairy tales? The wicked ones? Despite everything, Elizabeth laughed. The sound startled them both. I hope not wicked. But yes, like that. Except I promise to be kind. No poisoned apples, no towers, no forced labor in cinders. Thomas studied her with an intensity far too old for 5. Father says you married him for money. The bluntness stole her breath. She thought, did Alexander actually tell his 5-year-old son that? What does one even say to that? Yes, dear. I sold myself like produce at market. Your father told you that? She asked carefully. I heard him tell grandmother. He said you were honest about it. That's why he chose you. Because you didn't pretend. Elizabeth sat back on her heels, caught between shock and reluctant admiration for Alexander's brutal honesty, even with his son. Psst. It's true, she said slowly. I did need money. My mother was dying and I had no other way to save her. But I also chose your father because he was honest with me, and because I thought you might need someone who understands what it's like to lose people you love. Thomas's lower lip trembled. His small hands clutched his blanket. I miss Mama. But I don't remember her very well. Does that make me bad? Oh, sweetheart, no. Elizabeth pulled him into her arms. He stiffened, clearly unused to physical affection, then melted against her, tiny body shaking. You were so young when she died. You were barely a baby. It's not your fault you don't remember. Father won't talk about her. He gets angry. The words were muffled against her shoulder. Elizabeth thought, of course he doesn't talk about her. She ripped his heart out and danced on it, but you can't tell a 5-year-old that his mother was unfaithful. He's not angry at you, Elizabeth said gently, stroking his dark hair. He's angry at losing her. There's a difference. Sometimes adults are very bad at explaining their feelings. Are you bad at explaining feelings? She laughed. Absolutely terrible. The worst. Good. Thomas pulled back, face blotchy but determined. Then we match. Something in Elizabeth's chest melted completely. This solemn little boy with his 2 old eyes and his careful politeness, he was trying so hard to be brave. Will you play soldiers with me? He asked suddenly. None of the governesses ever want to. They say it's not ladylike, Elizabeth thought. Ladylike? I grew up playing war games with my father. I can out-strategize half the officers at horse guards, but apparently that's not ladylike. I would love to play soldiers, she said. Fair warning, I'm quite good. My father was an officer before he became ill. Thomas's eyes lit up. Really? Do you know about Wellington? Know about him? I could recite his entire peninsular campaign. They were in the middle of an epic battle, Elizabeth's cavalry routing Thomas's infantry with a brilliantly executed flanking maneuver, when Alexander appeared in the doorway. He'd clearly been riding. His hair was windswept, his boots muddy, and he smelled of horse and open air. Papa! Thomas jumped up, toy soldiers scattering. Look! The new Duchess knows battle tactics, real ones. She just used terrain advantage to crush my left flank. Something flickered across Alexander's face. Surprise? Pain? Confusion that his new wife was sprawled on the floor with his son discussing military strategy. Does she now? Alexander's voice was carefully neutral. She says Wellington won Waterloo because he understood positioning better than Napoleon, Thomas continued, bouncing with excitement Elizabeth hadn't seen before. Is that true? Very true. Alexander stepped into the room. The scent of leather and horse and sandalwood intensified. Where did you learn military strategy, Elizabeth? My father, Elizabeth said, still sitting cross-legged on the floor like a child. She thought, I must look ridiculous. A duchess playing soldiers on the nursery floor. But Thomas is smiling. Really smiling. So I don't care. Before the gambling consumed him, he was a brilliant officer in the 43rd Regiment, she continued. He taught me chess, war games, history, everything he knew. I was the son he never had. Pain flashed across her face. Alexander's expression softened infinitesimally. I see, he said quietly. Papa, can we have breakfast together? Thomas asked, hope naked in his voice. All three of us? Like a real family? The word real hung in the air like a prayer. Alexander's jaw tightened. Elizabeth watched him wage an internal war. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. I have business, Alexander began, his default escape. Please? Thomas's eyes were huge, hopeful in a way that made Elizabeth's heart ache. She thought, say yes. Say yes, you stubborn, frozen man. Look at your son's face. He's begging for scraps of your attention like a starving puppy. Alexander's internal war played out across his features. The instinct to withdraw battled against his love for his son. Elizabeth held her breath. Very well, Alexander said finally. Breakfast. Together. Thomas whooped with joy, flinging himself at his father. Alexander caught him, crushing the boy to his chest with a desperation that betrayed everything his cold voice tried to hide. They ate in the morning room, smaller, brighter than the formal dining room. Sunlight streamed through tall windows. The smell of fresh bread and jam filled the air. Thomas chattered about his soldiers, his pony named Buttons, the frog he'd found in the garden yesterday. His name is Sir Hopsalot, Thomas explained seriously. Because he's a knight, obviously. Elizabeth bit back a smile. Obviously, all frogs of noble character are knights. Alexander said little, but Elizabeth noticed he watched his son with an expression of mingled love and agony. Like a man dying of thirst watching water, he believed he couldn't drink. She thought, he wants to connect. He just doesn't remember how. Catherine broke something in him, and he's been running the same broken program for 5 years. After breakfast, Thomas was whisked away by his governess, a thin woman named Miss Hendricks who looked perpetually anxious. Alexander and Elizabeth stood alone in the sudden quiet. The morning room felt too intimate now, just the two of them, sunlight making dust motes dance, the scent of coffee still warm in the air. Thank you, Alexander said stiffly. For whatever you did last night, he hasn't asked for breakfast together since Catherine died. He's lonely, Elizabeth said gently. And so are you. Alexander's walls slammed back up. The warmth vanished like someone had doused a candle. I'm not lonely. I'm practical. You can be both. She stepped closer. The carpet muffled her footsteps. Alexander, you don't have to shut everyone out. Not me. Not Thomas. Don't I? His voice turned sharp as broken glass. The last person I let in destroyed me. Systematically. Deliberately. Forgive me if I'm not eager to repeat the experience of having my heart ripped out and used as a pincushion. I'm not Catherine. No, you're a woman I'm paying to play Duchess. Let's not confuse our arrangement with something it's not. You have your contract, I have mine. That's all this is. The words struck like a slap. Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. She thought, he's lashing out because I got too close, because for one moment during breakfast, he let himself hope, and hope terrifies him more than anything. Of course, Your Grace, she said coldly. Forgive my presumption. She turned to leave. Elizabeth, wait. His hand caught her arm. The touch was electric. Heat shot through her entire body from that single point of contact. I didn't mean... Damn it. She looked at him. Really looked. Past the ice, past the anger, to the terrified man beneath, the one who'd loved completely and lost catastrophically and learned exactly the wrong lesson from it. You're afraid, she said quietly. Not of me, of yourself, of feeling something again. I'm not afraid of anything. But his hand trembled on her arm. Liar. The word dropped between them like a stone in still water. Alexander stared at her, something dangerous kindling in his gray eyes. Anger, desire, both. You forget yourself, madam. I'm still the Duke. And I'm still human. Unlike you, who's pretending to be made of marble. Elizabeth's voice rose. All the frustration of the past days poured out. You want a wife who plays her role? Fine. I'll smile and curtsy and wear pretty dresses, but don't expect me to pretend your grief makes you noble. It just makes you cruel. Cruel to yourself, cruel to Thomas, cruel to everyone who tries to care about you. His hand dropped from her arm like she'd burned him. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. Then, my study, now. She thought, Oh God, I just screamed at a duke, my husband, the man who controls my entire family's fate. I'm going to be thrown out on the street in my nightgown. But she lifted her chin and followed him. In 15 miles away, in a dark cottage at the edge of Blackwood property, a man sat watching the manor through a dirty window. John Davies, gamekeeper, Catherine's lover, father of the boy who should have been his. He'd been watching for 5 years, waiting, planning, and now the Duke had brought a new woman into the house, another victim for Alexander's coldness to destroy. John's hands clenched. The knife on the table gleamed. Not this time. This time, justice would be served. Elizabeth followed Alexander through the corridors, her heart hammering. The sound of her shoes on marble echoed too loudly. She thought, "You just called a duke cruel. Your husband, the man who holds your family's fate in his hands like a soap bubble. This is either the bravest or stupidest thing you've ever done." The study door slammed behind them. Alexander paced like a caged lion, his control visibly fraying at the edges. His perfectly tied cravat was slightly askew now, the first crack in his armor. "You think you know me?" His voice was low, dangerous, the kind of quiet that comes before thunder. "You've been here 2 days, 48 hours. Long enough to see a man drowning in his own bitterness and refusing every rope thrown to him." He whirled to face her. "Catherine made a fool of me. Took my love, my trust, my devotion, everything I had, and threw it back in my face while she warmed another man's bed. You want me to simply, what? Forgive? Forget? Move on like it never happened? No." Elizabeth moved closer, refusing to be intimidated by his size, his fury, his title. "I want you to stop punishing your son for her sins. Thomas loses you a little more every day because you're too afraid to love him fully. He's 5 years old and already believes everyone leaves. Do you understand what you're doing to him?" "I'm not afraid." "Then prove it." Her voice rose to match his. "Have dinner with him. Read him bedtime stories. Let him see you as something other than a distant figure who appears and vanishes like smoke. Be his father, not his warden." Alexander's jaw clenched so hard she heard teeth grind. "You have no right." "I have every right. I'm his stepmother. It's in our contract, remember? Mother to Thomas, companion to you, hostess for your estate. That includes protecting him, even from you when necessary." The silence that followed was absolute. A clock ticked somewhere, each second loud as a heartbeat. Outside, a bird sang, oblivious to the storm in this room. Then, Alexander did something completely unexpected. He laughed. It was bitter, broken, but genuine. The first real laugh she'd heard from him. "You really are nothing like Catherine," he said. "She never challenged me, just smiled and agreed and spent my money and lied with every breath she took. You've been my wife for 2 days and you're already screaming at me. Someone needs to, apparently." He sank into his chair behind the desk, suddenly looking exhausted. The anger drained away, leaving only weariness. "I don't know how to be what he needs, Elizabeth. Every time I look at Thomas, I see her betrayal, her lies, the way she died calling for another man while I stood there useless." She thought, there it is, the wound that won't heal because he keeps picking at it. "Then learn to see differently," Elizabeth said quietly, moving to stand beside his chair. "I'll help you, but you have to let me." He looked up at her, vulnerability naked on his face for just a heartbeat. "Why do you care? This isn't in your contract. You could just collect your money and ignore us both." "Because I know what it's like to watch a parent disappear into grief," Elizabeth said. Her voice caught. "My father gambled away everything after my mother got sick. He was there physically, but he wasn't really there, and it destroyed us slowly, day by day. I won't watch you do that to Thomas." Something shifted in Alexander's expression. He stood, moved around the desk until only inches separated them. The scent of leather and horse and sandalwood surrounded her, intoxicating, overwhelming. "You're dangerous," he said softly. "Why?" "Because you make me want to try, want to hope. And hope is the most dangerous thing in the world." The words hung between them, charged with possibility and fear. Elizabeth's breath caught. This close, she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, the faint scar along his jaw, the pulse beating rapidly in his throat. She thought, this is the moment, the crack in the ice. Don't let it freeze over again. Alexander! A crash shattered the moment like glass. They sprang apart as the door burst open. Thomas stood there, face white with terror, his governess wringing her hands behind him. "There's a woman at the gates," Miss Hendricks gasped. "She says she's the real Duchess of Blackwood. She says she's come home." Elizabeth's blood turned to ice. Alexander went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that comes before an explosion. "That's impossible," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Catherine is dead." "Not Catherine, Your Grace." The governess trembled like a leaf in a storm. "Her sister, Lady Victoria Pemberton. She says she has proof that the marriage contract between you and Lady Elizabeth is invalid. She says she's the one you should have married all along." Victoria, the woman in emerald at the ball, the venom in her smile when she'd seen Elizabeth's old dress, the hatred barely concealed behind false civility. She thought, of course, Catherine's sister. Come to destroy what's left of Alexander's life, because grief isn't enough. She wants revenge. Alexander's face had gone carved from stone. "Show her to the drawing room. Tell her I'll be there shortly." The governess fled. Thomas remained in the doorway, frightened and confused, his small hands clutched at his wooden sword like a talisman. "Papa? What does she mean, invalid?" "Nothing, son. Go with Miss Hendricks." "But now, Thomas." The command brooked no argument. The boy left, casting one last worried look at Elizabeth. She wanted to comfort him but couldn't move. Her entire future hung in the balance of whatever Victoria had brought. Alone again, Alexander turned to her. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by cold fury that reminded her exactly why people called him the Ice Duke. "Did you know about this?" he demanded. "What? No!" Elizabeth's voice rose. "I barely know Victoria. She sneered at my dress at the ball, that's all. I've spoken maybe 10 words to her in my entire life." "Catherine's sister." Alexander's voice was hollow, scraped raw. "I should have known. The family never forgave me for killing Catherine by getting her pregnant. Victoria swore at the funeral she'd make me pay. I thought she meant socially. Apparently she meant legally." Elizabeth's mind raced. Her heart hammered so hard she felt dizzy. She thought, what proof could she possibly have? Our marriage was legal. The paperwork was perfect. Unless... "I don't know what she has," Alexander said, reading her expression. "But Victoria is cunning, ruthless. If she's come this far, she believes she has something real. Then we face it together." Elizabeth moved to his side. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he held out his hand. She took it. His palm was warm, solid, real, grounding her. They walked to the drawing room together, fingers intertwined. The corridor seemed endless. Each step echoed. Elizabeth's dress rustled, silk against silk, a whisper of wealth she still wasn't used to. Whatever was coming, whatever Victoria's game, Elizabeth would not hide. But as they approached the doors, panic clawed at her throat. She thought, what if she's right? What if our marriage really is invalid? What happens to Mother in the hospital? To James on his ship to America? To Thomas, who just started calling me Mama Elizabeth? And darker still, what happens to me? Where do I go? Back to the streets to starve. Victoria Pemberton sat in the drawing room as if she owned it. She'd changed from the emerald gown Elizabeth remembered. Now she wore black silk trimmed with jet beads, mourning clothes, for Catherine, presumably. But the effect was more predatory widow than grieving sister. The scent of her perfume, too sweet, cloying, expensive, filled the room. It made Elizabeth's stomach turn. "Alexander!" Victoria's voice dripped false sweetness like honey laced with arsenic. "And the little shop girl in the old dress. How quaint that you're still wearing her rags." Elizabeth's fingers tightened on Alexander's hand. He squeezed back, a warning or support, she couldn't tell. "State your business, Victoria," Alexander said coldly. "Then leave my home." "Your home?" Victoria stood, producing a folded document from her reticule with theatrical flourish. "That's precisely why I'm here. This marriage is fraudulent, a lie built on falsified documents." The word fraudulent hung in the air like poison gas. Elizabeth felt the room tilt. Blood rushed in her ears. "Explain." Alexander's voice could have frozen fire. Victoria's smile was triumphant. The cat who caught the canary and planned to torture it before the kill. "Your dear Elizabeth signed the marriage contract as Elizabeth Margaret Ashford, yes? Obviously, That's her legal name. Except it isn't, not legally. Victoria unfolded the document, taking her time, savoring every second. I had my solicitors investigate the Ashford family thoroughly. Very thoroughly. Turns out Elizabeth's father, in his infinite wisdom, changed their surname to avoid gambling debts 12 years ago, filed all the proper paperwork with the courts. Officially, legally, she is Elizabeth Margaret Thornton, has been since she was 14 years old. The blood drained from Elizabeth's face. The room spun. She thought, "Oh God, oh God, no, I forgot. Father changed our name when the creditors came, said it was temporary, that we'd change it back. We never did. I've been using Ashford for so long, I forgot Thornton was my legal name." "That's absurd," Alexander said, but Elizabeth heard the uncertainty creeping into his voice like frost. "Is it? A marriage contract requires accurate legal names. Sign under a false identity, even unknowingly, and the contract is void." Victoria's eyes glittered with malicious joy. "Which means you're not married at all. Just a duke living in sin with a fortune-hunting impostor who defrauded her way into your bed." "I didn't know," Elizabeth whispered. Her voice sounded small, broken. "I forgot about the name change. I've used Ashford for so long. Since I was a child, I didn't mean to." "Ignorance isn't innocence," Victoria cut her off viciously. "You signed a legal document with fraudulent information. That's grounds for annulment at best, criminal prosecution at worst. I've already spoken to my solicitors. They're drawing up the papers as we speak." Alexander's hand had gone rigid in Elizabeth's. She couldn't read his expression. Was he angry? Betrayed? Did he believe she'd done this deliberately? She thought, "He's going to hate me. He already barely trusts anyone after Catherine. Now I've given him proof that everyone lies, everyone deceives, even the wife he chose for her supposed honesty." "Even if this is true," Alexander said slowly, each word measured, "we can simply re-sign the contract with the correct name. Thornton instead of Ashford. The marriage stands." "Can you?" Victoria moved closer, a predator scenting blood in the water. "Or will the scandal destroy you first? Think, Alexander, really think. The newspapers will devour this story like starving dogs. Duke tricked by social climbing imposter. Blackwood bigamy scandal. Fortune hunter deceives London's richest duke." She circled them like a shark. Elizabeth wanted to run, to hide, to disappear. But Alexander's hand held hers in an iron grip. "Your reputation barely survived Catherine's. Indiscretions," Victoria continued. "The whispers about her death, the rumors about Thomas's parentage. How will it weather this? How will Thomas weather it when the other children mock him at school? When they whisper that his new mother is a fraud, a liar, a common criminal?" She was right. Elizabeth could see it. The whispers, the mockery, the shredding of Alexander's carefully maintained dignity. Thomas would hear the gossip. The family name would be dragged through mud. Everything Alexander had paid £50,000 to hide would resurface. All because of her. "What do you want, Victoria?" Alexander asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Now, Victoria's mask dropped completely. Pure hatred shone through, raw, festering, 5 years old, but fresh as yesterday. "You killed my sister, got her pregnant, trapped her in a loveless marriage, drove her to seek comfort elsewhere because you were too cold to love her properly. Then you let her die calling for the man she actually loved while you stood by and did nothing. That's not... I want justice!" Victoria's voice rose to a shriek that echoed off the walls. "I want you to feel what Catherine felt, trapped, powerless, destroyed by a marriage that was killing her soul. Annul this sham, pay Elizabeth off and send her back to her dying mother and wastrel brother. Let everyone see you for the cold, heartless monster you are. Let the world know the great Duke of Blackwood can't keep a wife alive or interested." The venom in her words left Elizabeth breathless. This wasn't about legal technicalities. This was revenge, pure and simple. Revenge for a sister who'd made her own choices but whose family couldn't accept it. Alexander released Elizabeth's hand. The loss of contact felt like abandonment, like falling off a cliff. She thought, "This is it. He's choosing his reputation over me. I would too in his position. I'm nothing. He's everything." "Get out," Alexander said quietly. Victoria blinked. "What?" "I said get out, now. before I have you physically thrown out of my home. You can't just... The proof is right here. I don't care. Alexander stepped forward, and even Victoria faltered at the fury in his face. Raw, terrible fury. You want to destroy me? Fine. Print your scandal sheets. Tell your lies to every newspaper in London. Shout it from the rooftops. But you will not speak to my wife that way in my home. Ever. My wife. The words made Elizabeth's chest ache. Hope fluttered weakly in her ribcage like a dying bird. Alexander, be reasonable. Harrison! Alexander's shout echoed through the manor like thunder. The butler appeared instantly, as if he'd been waiting. Escort Lady Pemberton from the premises. If she returns, call the constables. If she resists, use force. Victoria's face contorted with rage. Her careful beauty twisted into something ugly. You'll regret this. I'll make sure all of London knows what she is. A fraud, a liar, a scheming survivor. Alexander cut her off. His voice rang with certainty. She's a survivor who did what she had to for her family. Unlike you, who's using your sister's death as an excuse for cruelty 5 years later. Catherine made her choices. Own them. Harrison took Victoria's arm. She shook him off but moved toward the door, her face mottled with fury. This isn't over, she spat. I'll destroy you both. Then she was gone, leaving only the cloying scent of her perfume. Too sweet, too much, wrong. Elizabeth stood frozen, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. The magnitude of what just happened crashed over her in waves. Her marriage might be invalid. The scandal would erupt. Mother's medical care, James's passage to America, Thomas's stability. All of it hanging by a thread she'd accidentally cut 12 years ago when she was too young to understand. I'm sorry, she whispered. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I truly didn't remember the name change. I didn't mean to deceive you. I swear on everything I hold sacred. Alexander turned to her. His expression was unreadable, that cold mask she'd come to hate. Then it cracked. Completely. Do you know what I realized when Victoria was spewing her poison? He said quietly. Elizabeth shook her head, terrified of the answer. I don't care. She blinked. What? Invalid contract, wrong name, scandal, I don't care. He moved closer. His hands cupped her face with shocking gentleness. When Victoria called you a fraud, all I could think was that you're the most genuine person I've met in years. You're honest about your motives, even when it hurts you. You're kind to my son when you don't have to be. You challenge me when I'm being a bastard. You stayed with Thomas through his nightmares when any reasonable person would have sent a servant. But the marriage can be redone. Today, tomorrow, every day for the rest of our lives if necessary. We'll sign new papers with every name you've ever had. Thornton, Ashford, every variation, every possible legal technicality addressed. His thumb traced her cheekbone. If you still want to. Her heart stopped, restarted, raced. If I still want to? This marriage started as a transaction, Alexander said. His gray eyes, once so cold, held warmth now, real warmth. But somewhere between your honesty and your stubbornness and your terrible military strategy with toy soldiers, it became something more, at least for me. I don't know when it happened, but it did. She thought, this is real. He's choosing me over his reputation, over his pride, over everything. Alexander, her voice caught. Don't answer now. He dropped his hands, stepping back as if the intimacy frightened him. Old habits dying hard. Victoria will make good on her threats. The scandal will be brutal, be vicious. You should know what you're choosing before you choose it. I won't trap you the way Catherine was trapped. Elizabeth's mind reeled. She thought, he's giving me an escape route. After everything, after defending me, after calling me his wife, he's letting me go if I want. But she didn't want to go. The last weeks played through her memory like a theater production. Coming to the ball in her mother's old dress, desperate and terrified, Alexander's shocking compliment, the cold contract, Thomas's nightmares, slow breakfasts in sunlit rooms, Alexander's rare smiles, the feeling of building something real from broken pieces. The contract said 1 year, she said slowly. Are you asking me to stay longer? Something flickered in his gray eyes, hope warring with fear. I'm asking you to stay for the right reasons, not money, not obligation, not because you feel trapped, but because you want to, Because you choose this. Choose us. Choose us. Not him, not the title, not the wealth. Us, a family. And if I do stay, she forced herself to meet his gaze, if we re-sign the papers with the correct name, what changes between us? Alexander's jaw tightened. I don't know. I can't promise you love, Elizabeth. Catherine took that part of me and buried it in her grave. But I can promise honesty, partnership, respect, a real attempt to be better than the frozen bastard I've been. She thought, he's offering me everything he has left to give. It's not a fairy tale. But maybe fairy tales are overrated anyway. I'm not asking for love, Elizabeth said quietly. Liar, her heart whispered, but she pushed it away. I'm asking for partnership, for honesty, for a real marriage built on choice, not desperation, for a chance to build something genuine with you and Thomas. Real, he tested the word like foreign language. I'm not sure I remember what real feels like anymore. Then let me show you. Before either could move, shouting erupted from upstairs. Thomas's terrified scream shattered the moment like a hammer through glass. Papa! Papa! They both ran, taking stairs 2 at a time. Elizabeth's dress tangled around her legs. Her heart lurched. Please let him be safe. Please, God. They burst into Thomas's room to find him backed against the window, pointing with shaking finger at something on his bed. The governess stood frozen in the doorway, hand over her mouth in horror. On the pristine white coverlet lay a doll. But not just any doll, a perfect miniature bride with dark hair styled exactly like Elizabeth's, wearing a miniature version of the dress she'd worn to the ball, the old blue one, and pinned to its chest, a note in elegant script. She wasn't the first, she won't be the last. Some debts can only be paid in blood.